Good evening. My name is Jennifer Lubke, and I'm here this evening to talk to you about my theoretical orientation after taking the comparative theories class at Adler Graduate School. And as a side note, I would say it was very fascinating to learn about all the different theories and also then to kind of identify which ones I can relate to. Personally, I identify with the feminist theory approach. The reason I say that is because it doesn't necessarily have specific techniques that a therapist might follow, but it does have techniques that range from the existentialist point of view, choice and reality, Adlerian, person centered, and constructivist. And I did do my reading on Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and this did fit in very nicely with my viewpoint on it's so important for people to figure out who they are and what they want to be in their lives. As far as my view of human nature goes, I would say, on a personal perspective, that I believe people need to involve themselves with self-discovery and actualization. I believe in equality for all, which falls under that feminist theory. It's also important that people realize that they're in control of their own decisions and needing to take control of their own life. I also value looking at the positives and a client's strengths. And then with those strengths, looking at who they are. What have you experienced in your life? What do you know based on who you are? When I also consider the view of psychotherapy, I really identify with the humanistic psychologists, and you can see many of the names here, Fritz Perls, Carl Rogers, Viktor Frankl, who I've already mentioned, Alfred Adler, Carl Jung, and these specific psychologists really do focus on the humanistic approach, which I value as well. Taking a look at the humanistic approach, you can see the wordle here, which kind of highlights all the important attributes a person would want to have in therapy to really have your client feel valued, respected, having that emotional connection. Additionally, this approach emphasizes that a client shows significant growth, that they feel self-fulfillment, that the client understands the importance of authenticity and understanding who they really are as an individual, developing that mutual respect, the client-therapist relationship, having empathy for the client, and then last but not least, helping the client realize their own responsibility in therapy and their own ability to make their choices to be responsible. With a humanistic approach, a diagnosis is not essential. Therefore, the actual techniques are more important. Taking a look at some of the key concepts and techniques that I kind of brainstormed based on the existential, feminist, Adlerian, person-centered theory, and constructivist frameworks, I took a look at the main key concepts and then how those concepts could be potentially strategized with the certain techniques. So if you start at the top, when you look at the 4 existential ways of being, and I call that the nous, so how someone works together with nature, with oneself, with others, and with their spirituality. One technique to help folks with that might be using mindfulness. The second key concept there is the nature of anxiety. And the focus here is to help people realize that anxiety is normal. It's part of our everyday existence. We experience nervousness for a test. We are excited for when it's Christmas. We all have anxiety and those feelings of emotions. And the technique that could be applied here is using that empathetic mirroring and focusing so that the client knows that the therapist really understands how they feel and showing that empathy. The raising for change is really important for folks to realize that they can make the change, and that RCT technique where therapists really engage with their client, having that empathetic relationship is so powerful. Going down the authenticity, again, helping folks figure out who they are inter and intrapersonally. conditions of worth, helping clients realize their value and helping them see their own personal strengths. The lifestyle, which Adler refers to, understanding where people come from, attributes to how they act today. And doing a future autobiography kind of looks at how maybe you want to rewrite your own lifestyle. Social interest, showing the value in being part of a community and a sense of belonging, and using that technique here as if or acting out for the client to realize what it could look like in a different sense. The collaborative theory is really important, where the therapist and the client connect. And the letter writing is an example of how a therapist could actually reach out to one of their clients after a session. I also identify with the strengths and solution-focused therapy as a potential school counselor, looking at those sparkling moments that students may have. And then last but not least, realizing the client needs to understand that change is inevitable. And it's important that change is a natural process of therapy, and helping clients reframe their thinking to go through that cognitive process. Some multicultural considerations. First and foremost, therapy should not impose on anyone's personal values. So the therapist needs to be mindful of that. Second, being cautious of emotional expression restrictions. The type of therapy that a humanistic approach values is allowing clients to feel that emotional connection, and that would oftentimes be restricted in certain cultures. Therapy in general, when it's the humanistic approach, is very person-centered, and so that allows for personal empowerment, which is very suitable for multicultural considerations. All the approaches, I need to be careful in considering looking beyond just the Western approach. And then last but not least, being really cautious to use respectful language, because oftentimes the approach can be somewhat direct, and I would never want to offend a client. Now, there is a client here named Gabriella, and I took some time to review her case, watch her body posture, listen to her speak, and I came up with some conclusions as a future therapist. First and foremost, Gabriella is a young woman in her late teens, and she was referred to a therapist by her general practitioner. Some of the problems you'll see there on the left side, Gabriella was disengaged from social settings. She felt depressed and inadequate. She had a lot of concerns about her mother's criticism and judgment, worried about what her mom thought. In general, she lacked overall confidence, again, worried about what others thought. And she really seemed to she said she felt tired and sluggish. Some of the factors that may have led up to some of these problems, she did describe that she experienced a difficult breakup with her boyfriend. She had recently dropped out of medical school, and so she was feeling a little bit hopeless and lost with her school plans. And again, they're uncertain about her future plans. Some other leading factors that I considered is, did she possibly have other prior difficulties in school before college, which would have contributed to her lacking confidence? I also want to kind of investigate some of the leading factors with the strained relationship she seems to have with her mother, and she puts a lot of pressure on herself. So I'm wondering what kind of outside pressures she has upon herself to excel. So as far, if I were Gabriella's counselor, here are some goals that I would have for her for some future health benefits. I definitely would want to create some opportunities for her to engage in social interests, so she had more of a sense of belonging, whether it is she has a group of friends that she could play volleyball with, or someone she could go and sit and have coffee. She needs that connection with someone. I also think it's important for her to begin understanding that cognitive reframing, to really understand her situation at hand, to reframe it and understand that she is where she is right now, but it's going to get better. The third thing is obviously providing that unconditional positive regard for her, to help her realize that I have faith in her, and she then would experience her own self-actualization. Fourth, I think it's very important to teach Gabriella about anxiety and to learn from it, and that is an experience in life, and it's not anything to be ashamed of, that anxiety is a normal part of our existence. And last but definitely not least, I would like Gabriella to become aware of her own personal strengths and how she can see herself growing in the future, and what she's interested in, to kind of just take a look at her future plans. The information that I feel like I still need is I really would like to do a lifestyle assessment with Gabriella, take a look at some of her early recollections as a child, and even kind of look at her birth order just to kind of see what life was like for her growing up as a child. In addition, I think it's very important to understand the relationship between her parents when she grew up. She explained that she had a difficult breakup, if she has difficulty with relationships of her own. And I never heard her mention her father. She only mentioned her mother. So I'd be curious to find out more about the relationship that was modeled for her growing up. Additionally, I'd like to know past experiences in school. She seemed very not confident, lacking confidence in school. And she sensed a feeling, I sensed that she felt inadequate. And I'd like to know what other, issues she may have had at school prior to going to college. And also just socially. I mean, she's described not wanting to hang out in social settings. To kind of engage her, I'd also like to talk with her about what she's really good at. What are her strengths? What are her current interests? What does she like to do? And really try to discover what is that authentic meaning she has for her life? What is she passionate about? What does she see herself doing? Just to kind of have that conversation for her to realize that she has an amazing potential. Some possible interventions and strategies, kind of going in order there, starting with the heart. I believe it'll be very, very important to set up the relational cultural therapy, the RCT style. As a therapist, I need to be encouraging for her, definitely very empathetic, and using self-disclosure myself just to model the value of this open relationship that she could have with her therapist. Second, I do believe that motivational interviewing would be a really positive intervention for Gabriella. This approach would provide an opportunity for her to make a behavioral change. And ultimately, she should be using her own voice for change. And this could occur with motivational interviewing. This type of technique helps the client understand their own possible need for change. The third is the future autobiography, which is an Adlerian concept. And I believe that Gabriella would really benefit from looking at who she sees herself down the road. At her current state, she feels stuck. She doesn't know where she's going. She doesn't know what she wants to do for school. And to sit down and say to Gabriella, okay, let's look at where you are right now. And let's project maybe where you want to go to the future and help her guide her own individual self-ideal to help her shape her life. And the last one there is probably the most important, practicing mindfulness, coming from the existential practice. I believe that Gabriella needs that opportunity to understand her situation and to practice that mindfulness without any judgment during these challenging moments that she's having in her life. And with all of these possible interventions, and of course, there's other strategies and techniques that could be applied, I think these 4 would be a really good start. As a school counselor, too, I would be very interested in having her take a strengths-based test or a career key just to see what her interests are for possible future careers. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation and my approach to counseling, and I'm excited to keep investigating more. Bye-bye.